Liam Calloway stepped out of the crumbling doorway and into the wasteland that had once been a thriving city. The air tasted stale, like metal and dust, and the remnants of old neon signs flickered weakly against the gray sky. His boots crunched against broken concrete as he surveyed the ruins through his augmented goggles, their heads-up display flashing faint signals of heat signatures and structural weaknesses. He wasn't here for the broken buildings, though. He was here for the people, the last of the survivors. The ones who hadn't given up. Or those who hadn't been killed by the scavengers, the roving bands of marauders who had turned sound itself into a weapon. Liam's job wasn't just finding people. It was finding them using sound, using frequencies others couldn't hear or recognize. In a world where the collapse had taken away everything: electricity, communication, society itself, Liam had become one of the few people left who could interpret the eerie quiet in a way that made sense. His enhanced hearing, developed through years of military-grade tech training, let him detect the faintest of cries. In a city where survival meant staying hidden, sound had become a weapon, and Liam had learned to use it to his advantage. His earpiece crackled with static as a distant voice reached him. A cry. "Help! Help me, please!" It was faint, but unmistakable. The kind of sound you never forgot. Someone in distress. Liam hesitated for a moment, fingers hovering over the comm system. The faintest quiver of doubt touched him. He wasn't just hearing things. He knew what this was. It was too clean, too perfect, like a professional scream. Whoever was behind that cry wasn't trying to survive, they were trying to lure him in. He checked his tracker. The signal was coming from a collapsed building a few blocks away, the remains of what might have been a luxury apartment complex before everything had fallen apart. Liam didn't hesitate. He couldn't afford to. The people who needed him had learned to adapt, and so had he. His senses were sharper now, conditioned by the years of searching, of learning how to distinguish real from fake. Every sound was a test, a puzzle. He began moving, his footsteps light but steady. The sky above was an oppressive shade of gray, the air thick with dust and the promise of another storm. He turned a corner and stopped dead in his tracks. The cry had changed. No longer a plea for help, it was now distorted, an eerie laugh, followed by a shrill scream, then silence. The sound moved, warping like a bad radio signal. The moment it twisted, Liam knew he had walked into a trap. His pulse quickened, but he didn't panic. Panic would get him killed. He scanned the buildings, looking for an elevated position. A sniper could be waiting anywhere. God damn it, he muttered to himself, checking the tracker again. It was still showing a signal, but he couldn't tell how far away the source was. There were too many reflections in the shattered ruins, too many places where sound bounced and echoed unpredictably. He reached up and adjusted the volume on his earpiece, then activated the auditory filter that helped him isolate the signals he needed. He could feel his heart pounding now, his breath coming faster as he adjusted to the heightened awareness. Then it came. The voice again, this time clearer, more urgent. "Help me, I'm here. Please, don't leave me behind. I'm stuck under the rubble." It was a woman. Her voice cracked with desperation, laced with fear. He couldn't ignore it. Moving fast, Liam pushed forward, trying to block out everything except the voice. He was close now. He was almost there. Suddenly, a new sound sliced through the air, a screech. High-pitched, sharp, and brutal. It wasn't human. It was a mechanical sound, screeching like nails on a chalkboard. The sound tore through his earpiece, and for a moment, everything went black. He hit the ground, instinctively rolling to the side, but the damage had been done. His vision blurred, his mind a storm of static. The sound of the distortion lingered in his ears like a lingering headache. For a moment, he couldn't hear the woman's voice anymore. But then, it came back. Faint again, and this time, it sounded different. Too soft. Too far away. "Help," the voice whispered. Liam clenched his jaw. The trap had been set. Whoever was behind it had used a combination of psychological manipulation and audio distortion to throw him off, to disorient him. They were playing with him, and they knew exactly how to make him vulnerable. He crawled to his feet, shaking his head to clear the ringing in his ears. His hand gripped his rifle tightly. The woman's cry, distorted as it was, had been his signal. And now, he was the prey. Who are you? He thought to himself. Who's trying to break me? He moved quickly, heading toward the coordinates the tracker had given him. His movements were methodical now, cautious. He knew better than to trust anything without verifying it himself. As he moved closer to the ruins of a nearby building, the sounds grew more erratic. First, the woman's voice again, this time more distant, like it was coming from inside the walls. Then came the echo, another distorted voice calling for help. But this wasn't the voice of a woman. Liam. Liam, please, help me. I'm stuck, you have to save me. Liam froze. That voice, he knew it. He knew it all too well. The voice of his wife, Amelia, the woman he had lost years ago during the collapse. Her body had never been found, but Liam had spent years, months, searching for her, hoping for some sign, any sign, that she was still alive. And now, it was her voice, calling to him. The world around him seemed to shrink, closing in like a vice. His heart pounded in his chest. His eyes darted around as he spun, trying to locate the source. Was it a trick? Was he being manipulated by some advanced technology, some new form of psychological warfare designed to break him? Or was it real? Liam forced himself to focus, to breathe. The voice sounded too clean, too perfect, like it was being played back on a loop. It was coming from somewhere nearby, but there were no signs of movement, no heat signatures. Just empty space and the echoes of his mind playing tricks on him. Stay calm, he told himself. Stay focused. With a deliberate motion, Liam reached for the frequency filter again and adjusted it, isolating the voice from the surrounding sounds. The voice was still there, clear as day, but something felt off about it. There was an unnatural, almost mechanical quality to it. It wasn't the voice of a person in distress, it was a simulation, an imitation. He gritted his teeth, stepping forward. This wasn't a rescue mission. This wasn't a cry for help, this was a trap. And it was designed to break him, but he wasn't about to fall for it. Liam moved forward, every step measured, every sense on high alert. His training had taught him how to survive in environments like this, where nothing was as it seemed. The world had become a fractured, chaotic place, and in that chaos, you had to learn to trust only one thing, yourself. He continued forward, inching closer to the source of the voice. And as he did, the voice grew more distorted, more garbled. At first, it sounded like his wife calling out for him, but now, it was a grotesque parody of her voice, warped and jagged. The laughter from earlier returned, high-pitched and sinister. Help me, Liam, help me, you're too late. Liam's pulse quickened as the voice cut off abruptly. He kept moving. He was almost there, but as he turned the final corner, he found the source. The building was eerily quiet. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the silence itself was alive. And there, at the center of the ruined street, was a strange contraption, an old radio tower, its metal frame twisted and bent from the years of decay. The base was littered with broken wires and speakers, and at the top, a small device was spinning slowly, its rotor catching the wind. Liam's heart sank. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a sound trap. It was multiple traps, layered one over the other, designed to warp perception, to break him down until he couldn't trust his own senses anymore. The voice, the laughter, the distorted cries, they were all part of a system, a network designed to target him specifically. And whoever was behind it knew how to push his buttons, knew how to make him question his own sanity. He reached for his weapon, scanning the area around him. There were no immediate threats, no people, no ambushes waiting. Just silence. The calm before the storm. He wasn't just a tracker anymore. He was the hunted, and whoever was behind these traps would learn one thing about Liam Calloway: he didn't break that easily. Liam's hand hovered over his weapon, but the silence around him felt thick, pressing in on his chest. There were no sounds now, not the woman's cry, not the distorted laughter, nothing. It was as if the city had swallowed them all whole. His breath came in shallow bursts, and his heartbeat still thudded in his ears, but the silence was so absolute, so terrifying, that he felt his body betray him. The tension in the air was palpable, almost electric. This was no longer just a trap. It was something much worse. He stepped forward cautiously, his boots crunching against the brittle concrete, echoing too loudly in the quiet. Every footfall felt like it was bringing him closer to something unseen, something far worse than the physical danger he'd been prepared for. His mind raced. There had been no sniper, no ambush, no confrontation. Just this, silence, then, from nowhere, a sound cut through the quiet. A rustle, followed by the unmistakable hum of a transmission. Liam Calloway. The voice was distorted, like it had been filtered through a broken speaker, but there was no mistaking the tone. It wasn't the woman anymore, not his wife or anyone else he'd lost. It was them. The ones who had orchestrated this madness. That he spun around, eyes scanning the ruins, but saw nothing. His tracker had gone blank. The faint signal he'd been following had vanished, along with any other trace of life. "Do you hear that?" the voice continued, now shifting in and out, playing with the space around him like a ghost on the wind. "I bet you do, Liam. You've been trained to hear things that no one else can. It's the key to everything, isn't it? Sound is power, isn't it?" Liam's fists clenched, and he fought the urge to scream back, to demand answers. But that's what they wanted, wasn't it? For him to lose control, to let his frustration drive him deeper into their trap. This wasn't just psychological warfare, it was a hunt. He was being drawn out, and they were toying with him, trying to break him apart piece by piece. The voice paused, then came again, quieter, as if it was whispering directly into his mind. "I know you want to find them, Liam. I know you want to believe that there's someone left to save. But what if the only thing left is you? What if you're the last one?" The words hit harder than he expected, the weight of them pulling him in. He blinked, trying to clear his mind, but the suggestion, the possibility of it gnawed at him. "You don't know me," he muttered to the empty street, his voice rough. He wasn't talking to the voice anymore. He was talking to the part of him that still believed, still hoped. But the doubt was there, hanging heavy in the air like the storm clouds that loomed overhead. He needed to focus. He needed to find the source of that transmission before it could break him down any further. He turned his attention back to the radio tower, the twisted metal structure that had been the epicenter of the trap. He reached into his pack and pulled out a handheld device, a frequency scrambler, one of the few pieces of tech that could possibly block out whatever signal was scrambling his mind. As he activated it, the hum of the transmission faded into static. For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of triumph. It wasn't much, but it was something. He was still in control, but the relief didn't last. "Do you really think that's going to stop me?" The voice was louder now, closer, as if it were right behind him. It seemed to pulse with a rhythm of its own, the words coming at him like a drumbeat. "You can block the signal, but you can't block your thoughts. Can you?" Liam turned, his pulse racing, but the voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. His mind screamed in protest. He had to stay calm. He had to stay in control. The air suddenly felt colder, and Liam's breath came out in a cloud of vapor. He realized too late that he had wandered too far into the epicenter of the trap. The twisted radio tower was only the physical manifestation of something much deeper, a network of sound-based psychological warfare that reached into every corner of the city. He was surrounded by it, and the true weapon wasn't the radio itself. It was the sound that reverberated through the air, playing on his mind, distorting his perception. His eyes darted around, looking for a way out. But every direction was an echo, every surface reflected the sounds he couldn't escape. The walls, the ruins, the empty windows, everything seemed to amplify the dissonance. Then he heard it, Liam. It was a voice he recognized, but this time, it wasn't distorted. It was clear. It was Amelia. He froze. This wasn't just a trap anymore. This was an assault on his very soul. He spun on his heel, his gun raised, eyes wild. The voice had come from behind him, from the shadows beneath a collapsed building. He could see nothing but darkness, but he knew that she was there. She was real. It was her. Amelia. His voice cracked, the name a raw plea. "Come to me, Liam," the voice whispered again, soft, coaxing, almost like the wind itself. "I've been waiting for you." Every instinct screamed at him to run. Every piece of training he'd ever learned told him that this was a trick. But his heart told him something different. It told him to trust the voice, to step into the shadows and find her, to make everything right again. He took a step forward, his feet heavy. Then another. And another, but just as his hand reached out, the voice stopped. The air around him chilled in an instant, the temperature dropping rapidly as if the world itself was holding its breath, and then, the laughter returned. High-pitched, twisted, the same sound that had torn through his earpiece earlier. It wasn't Amelia anymore. It was a mockery. "Did you really think it was that easy?" The voice, now sharp and cruel, sent a shiver up his spine. "Did you really think we'd let you find her that easily?" The trap closed in around him. Liam snapped out of it, his mind racing. The last shred of sanity he had was crumbling under the weight of their manipulation, but he wasn't going to let it win. Not like this. He wrenched his head around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but there was nothing. The transmission had stopped. The laughter had stopped. The world felt still. Too still. For a moment, Liam just stood there, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body tense. He was alone. The city stretched out before him, empty, desolate, as if it had swallowed everything whole. And then he understood, this wasn't about finding his wife, this wasn't about saving anyone. It was about him. About his mind. His breaking point, and it was coming. Fast, the city, the traps, the sounds, it was all designed for one purpose, to break him. But Liam wasn't ready to break. Not yet. He'd come too far. He clenched his fists, his breath steadying. "I'm not your pawn," he whispered to the air. "You want me to break? You're going to have to do better than that." There was no answer. Only the distant wind. He had to move. He had to keep moving, even if he didn't know where to go. The city was a maze of sound, a labyrinth of tricks and illusions. But if he was going to survive this, if he was going to escape, he had to stay ahead of the traps. He had to outsmart them, because one thing was clear, someone or something was watching his every move, and it wasn't done with him yet. Liam took a deep breath and pushed forward. The emptiness of the city around him was suffocating, its silence a weight on his chest, and the creeping sense of being watched never left him. His eyes flicked from shadow to shadow, from ruin to ruin, each broken structure seeming to hold its breath, waiting for him to make a mistake. The slightest misstep, the smallest hesitation, and it would be over. The landscape was a mirror of his mind, fractured, distorted, scattered with remnants of a life he could barely remember. A life before this endless game of survival. He hadn't expected this. Not in 1,000 years. The endless horrors, the loss, the death, he had braced himself for all of it. But this? This psychological warfare, this sound trap, it was different. It felt more personal. Like they knew him in ways he had never imagined. Every step he took, every movement felt like it brought him closer to an inescapable fate. But Liam wasn't going to let it happen. Not today. Not like this. The transmission from before had died, but the silence that followed it felt like 100 voices whispering in his ear. The deeper he moved into the city, the more he became acutely aware of how vulnerable he was. The static was louder now, a dull hum in the back of his mind that he couldn't escape. No matter how much he tried to focus on the here and now, the city seemed to push back, pulling at the edges of his thoughts, bending them into shapes he didn't recognize, and then, it came again. "Liam, it's time. Come to me." The voice was faint at first, just a whisper on the wind, but it grew louder with each passing second. It wasn't like the distorted transmission before. This wasn't a trick. This was her. The voice he had been chasing all along. The voice of his wife, Amelia. His stomach lurched. Was it real this time? Or was it yet another layer of the trap? He should have known better than to let himself get caught in it. But this felt different. There was something about the way her voice broke through the static, something too raw, too real. He couldn't stop himself from moving toward it. Each step was a battle between his instincts and his heart. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, to fight the trap. But his heart was telling him to listen. To trust. The voice called again, and this time it wasn't just the words. He could hear the sound of ragged breathing, the faintest rustle of fabric, the soft sobs that followed. His mind whirled, trying to make sense of the contradiction. How could this be real? How could she still be alive, Liam? I need you. Her voice wavered, his pulse quickened. He knew he shouldn't believe it. The signal, the distortion, the traps, it all screamed at him to stop, to think. But the agony in her voice was undeniable. He could hear the pain, the desperation. He had heard it before, hadn't he? When she'd disappeared. When the world had fallen apart. He had to find her. His legs carried him through the ruins, past buildings that had once been towering giants, now reduced to rubble. His boots kicked up the dust, the sound harsh against the stillness. The world had once been full of noise, full of life. But now, it was just echoes. And through those echoes, he followed her. The wind picked up, carrying the voice further ahead. Liam, please, don't leave me. The words were sharp, cutting through the quiet like a knife. The sounds around him, the hum of broken machinery, the occasional creak of settling ruins, all seemed to fade away, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to take the final step. He pushed harder, driven now by something beyond logic, beyond reason. The distance between him and the voice shortened, and in his mind, it was Amelia, his wife, his love, calling out for him. How could he abandon her? How could he turn away now? The buildings loomed ahead, each one a fortress of decay, but in the distance, he saw a flicker of light. A window, broken but intact, glowed faintly. It was a beacon, or so it seemed. The light beckoned, and with it, a sense of finality. This was it. He was close. The voice called once more, clearer than ever, now almost a scream. Liam, hurry. I'm dying. Please. He broke into a run, his mind drowning in the sound, the need to reach her, to be the hero. He was so close now. He could feel it in the air, like the electric hum of a storm about to break. His thoughts blurred together. The only thing left was the need to save her. His hand clenched around the rifle at his side. His fingers gripped tighter, until his knuckles were white, and then, just as he reached the doorway of the building, the voice stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Liam froze, his breath shallow. His heart hammered in his chest, the sound too loud in the quiet. His body was tense, coiled like a spring ready to snap. There was no sound. No voice. The light flickered again. He took a step forward, into the doorway. Liam. The voice came from behind him, but it wasn't Amelia's. It was that same distorted voice from before, echoing from the walls, twisting and bending the words as if they were being squeezed through a vice. He spun around, rifle raised, but there was nothing. The hallway behind him was dark, empty. Liam, you never learn, do you? The voice was colder now, mocking. You never learn that it's not about what you want. It's about what we want. The walls seemed to close in on him. The floor beneath his feet felt unstable, as if the very ground was shifting. His mind raced, the panic clawing at the edges of his thoughts. This was a trap. A setup. Everything, from the start, had been a game. They had played him. The lights flickered again, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw her. Amelia. Standing at the end of the hallway. Her face pale, eyes wide, looking at him with a mixture of hope and terror. "Liam, come to me." It was her. It had to be. His legs moved on their own, carrying him toward her, each step louder than the last, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The closer he got, the more she seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Was she real? Was she the answer? Or was she just another illusion in this twisted maze of sound? "Amelia." His voice was a desperate gasp, barely a whisper, but the silence around him swallowed it whole. Just as he reached her, just as he extended his hand to touch her, everything went black. The ground beneath him gave way. The building, the hallway, the light, everything shattered into nothingness.